हरि करना।
Now let's look into the various types of significance tests. So, types of significance tests in statistical analysis, a comprehensive overview. So, a significance test is nothing but we use different types of distributions, either t distribution or f distribution or chi-square. We will use the distribution and we'll calculate the respective respective statistic. It could be t statistic or chi-square characteristic or chi-square statistic. Then using that respective distribution statistic, we will calculate the probability value, and then we will compare the probability value with the significance level threshold, and then we will decide whether the respective effect is significant or not. For that, we use a significance test, where there are different types of several types of significance tests that can be used to determine whether an observed difference or effect is statistically significant. So some of them could be t-test, ANOVA, analysis of variance, chi-square test, and then Wilcoxon rank sum test, Kroschel-Wallis test, and many more, many more. So we will begin with t-test. So t-test is a statistical significance test. So there are numerous types of significant tests depending on whether the data comprises count data or measured data, how many samples there are, and what's being measured. A very common one is the t-test, named after students' t-distribution, originally developed by W.S. Gossett to approximate the distribution of a single sample mean. So we have discussed completely in detail about the t-test and t-distribution in our previous course, intuitive sampling and distribution course. If you want to have the detailed understanding, I would request and refer you to watch that video. Next, so all significance tests require that you specify a test statistic to measure the effect you are interested in and help you determine whether that observed effect lies within the range of normal chance variation. So in a resampling test, the scale of the data does not matter. You create a reference that is nothing but your null hypothesis and the distribution from the data itself, and use the test statistic as is. So in the 1920s and 1930s, when statistical hypothesis testing was being developed, it was not feasible to randomly shuffle data thousands of times to do a resampling test. Statisticians found that a good approximation to the permutation, that shuffled distribution, was the t-test based on the Gossett's t-distribution. So it's used for very common two-sample comparison, A-B test, in which the data is numeric, but in order for t-distribution to be used without regard to scale, a standardized form of the test statistic must be used. So a t-test is statistical significance test used to determine whether there is a significant difference between the means of two groups. It is typically used when the sample size is small and the populations have normal distribution. So there are two main types of t-tests. One is independent sample test and a paired sample test. However, I just want you to understand what is t statistic, a test statistic first. A test statistic, a metric for the difference or effect of interest. And t statistic is a standardized version of common test statistics such as means. Then you have t distribution, a reference distribution, in this case derived from the null hypothesis to which the observed t statistic can be compared. So now we will look into the first type of sample, first type of t-test, that is independent samples t-test. This test is used to compare the means of two independent groups. For example, you might use an independent samples t-test to determine whether there is a significant difference in the salaries of men and women. These are completely independent in a particular company. So that's if we do it for an groups which are completely independent, that's called independent samples test. Or if you do it for dependent one, that's called paired samples t-test. This test is used to compare the means of two related groups. For example, you might use a paired samples t-test to determine whether there is a significance difference in the weight of individuals before and after they participate in the weight loss program. So these two groups are related, so that's the reason this is called paired sample test. Paired samples t-test. One is independent samples, second one is paired samples. So the t-test works by calculating a t-value which represents the difference between means of the two groups relative to the variability within each group. The t-value is then compared to a critical value from a t-distribution based on the degree of freedom and the desired level of significance. If the t-value exceeds the critical value, the difference between the means is considered statistically significant at the chosen level of significance.